Welcome to 2016 Presidential Candidate Interviews. Today I am interviewing Darryl W. Perry. Mr. Perry is running as a Libertarian. Hello, Mr. Perry, and welcome to 2016 Presidential Candidate Interviews.
Thanks for having me.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I'm doing great, I'm going to start out with some icebreaker questions. Are you ready?
Absolutely.
All right. Can you describe your family and home life?
Yeah, so the home life is actually kind of interesting for me now. Back in June, I bought a minibus from a YMCA here in New Hampshire, and I'm actually converting that into an RV. So I've been living in that since late June. So the plan is to have a tiny portable house that I could then take on the road and then always kind of be at home. So that is the home life. The family life, I don't really have any family in the area where I live, but I do have some good friends. So that, that's kind of like having family, right? Because family is not necessarily the people that you're related to by blood. It's the people that you're close to.
Can you describe your employment and your work experience?
Yeah, so I am semi-self-employed, meaning that I do run my own business. It's not my sole means of income, but it certainly supplements the income that I have coming in. So the business that I run is Free Press Publications, where I put out daily news and commentary. I have a daily 5-minute newscast that I've been producing since February of this year. Today actually marks the 230th day, so I'm sure by the time you actually release this, it's probably going to be up over 230. But as of today, September 20th, it's at 230 consecutive days. So this is a 7-day-a-week newscast that I put out. I also put out a monthly newspaper, and there are other things that I do all there at Free Press Publications. You can find online at fpp.cc. And to sort of help supplement that, I also do affiliate relations for Free Talk Live, which is a national radio show that right now is on over 160 radio stations across the country. It's definitely by far the largest real libertarian syndicated radio show in the country.
What are your hobbies and interests?
I love to travel, although I've not done as much recently as I would like to. I also, and I know that this is kind of weird, but I also like to read and write. So a lot of the stuff that I do throughout the day is definitely work related, but I really enjoy doing it, so it doesn't really feel like work.
Your favorite place to eat out?
That's a really tough question because I like going to several different local places. Chains are okay every now and then, but I would definitely say that anywhere that I can sit with a group of friends and actually have a conversation while we're eating.
Do you have any favorite fast food joints, any dirty little secret places you like to pull up in your unidentified automobile and get some unhealthy food?
I wish that there was a Chick-fil-A around here because I really love their chicken sandwiches. I was born and raised in Alabama, so, like Chick-fil-A, it's there. Not so much in New Hampshire. So I would definitely say that I miss Chick-fil-A. I like Wendy's because I think that their food is slightly better than McDonald's, but I've not gotten good service at Wendy's recently, so I've stopped going there, unfortunately.
And along the same lines, any dirty little secret junk foods, candy bars, cookies, anything like that?
I love eating Mike and Ike or Good and Plenty. I would say those are my top 2 junk foods.
Any favorite TV shows and movies?
I am addicted to Game of Thrones. I love the show, and I actually, when I first started watching the show, it was after season 3. One of my friends said, you definitely need to watch this show. I watched the first 3 seasons in 1 week.
Wow, okay. Do you have any pets on the road there?
I do not have any pets.
And the final icebreaker question, can you name a song that you consider your life anthem, your motto, a song that represents who you are?
I don't really have a song that I would say, like this represents who I am, but I really like the song Burn by Ellie Goulding. I'm not sure if you've ever heard the song, but it's a very good song, and I really like it.
All right, and now into the more serious questions that hopefully most of the electorate really cares about. Why are you running for president?
I want to give people an actual libertarian choice in the 2016 election. And a lot of people are going to say, well, but Gary Johnson is most likely going to run again, and then Rand Paul's probably going to run. But neither one of those two is really libertarian. One of them actually claims the word libertarian, but I don't think he knows what it means. And the other one has done everything he can to distance himself from the word libertarian. But there's not an actual libertarian option, well, aside from me. And when I say an actual libertarian option, I mean someone who will consistently promote libertarian ideology of reducing the size, scope, and power of the government at every level on every issue.
Name some unique abilities you would bring to the office of president.
This is a really tough question because I'm not really sure, people are going to say, like, I'm articulate, and that's not really a presidential ability necessarily of being articulate, although it could help convey a message that one is trying to promote. Because we all know George Bush was not the most articulate person, and he wound up getting elected. So I don't really know how good being articulate would be as far as a special or unique ability. But I would say that's definitely, one of the stronger points that I have is that I'm able to convey a message, a very consistent libertarian message, in a manner that doesn't scare people. Because a lot of times when a libertarian tries to convey a message, they kind of scare people with, we're going to get rid of the army. Well, what about defense? And then they try to explain how things would work, but they wind up just scaring people more. And people wind up with this idea in their head that Blackwater is going to control national defense, when, in fact, that's not really what a libertarian would want to see in a libertarian utopia, if you will. And I don't really like the term libertarian utopia, but I always get that thrown back at me of, well, in your libertarian utopia, how would you handle X? And in a lot of ways, I'm able to articulate the ideas in a way that, one, makes people think about the status quo, and two, leaves them not being scared.
Are there any past presidents that you look on with favor that have aspects of their administration you would try to follow, emulate, be like?
I really liked Thomas Jefferson's writings. I did not like the way he actually implemented things when he was elected. So I would say that there is not a president that I would emulate their actions while they were actually president. But I would definitely, and again, just for clarification, I'm not a constitutionalist at all. I think that the U.S. Constitution is just a document, and I agree with Lysander Spooner that it has either authorized the government we have or has been powerless to prevent it. In either case, it's unfit to exist. But, the Constitution is there to regulate what the federal government does. So if I were to get elected by some weird miracle, I would do everything I could to make sure that the federal government abided by the document that's in place that is sort of their rule book. Even though I don't think that that rule book should even exist, I don't think the federal government should exist. But if, asking which president I would emulate, I would emulate the writings of Thomas Jefferson, not so much the actions of Thomas Jefferson.
Are there any presidents you look on with complete and absolutely disdain, and what aspects of their administration do you not like and would not want to be like?
I'm prone to say all of them because they have all done horrible things. They've all grown the size of the federal government. They've all increased the power. There's a running joke that Barack Obama is the third term of George W. Bush. I like to say that he's the 57th term of George Washington.
Okay. Are there any functions of government you'd like to cut or abolish, and why? And I'm sure this could probably be a completely separate interview for you, but go for it.
All of them? Again, I don't even think that the federal government should exist. I would love to see the federal government completely go away and all 50 states plus the territories be independent and, try to sort it out from there. I know there's the move out in California to break California up into 6 separate states. Texas, they keep saying, like, we could split into 5 states at any time. Okay, then why don't you? So I think that the federal government should just completely go away. And the more nations that there are, the better life would be for everyone. Because right now, the U.S. government involves itself in pretty much every event and every affair around the globe. So if that government didn't exist, then there wouldn't be as many problems internationally as there are.
Are there any areas of government you would like to add to or increase? I'm thinking I could probably answer this one, and why?
No. So that's a very short one-word answer. And why I would not want to increase anything is because I am a libertarian, and I don't ever want to increase the size, scope, or power of any government for any reason. I want to decrease the size, scope, and power across the board as much as possible, down to the individual level.
What is your stance on taxes and raising revenue for government?
Let me think for a second here, because I'm generally, when people ask me my thought on taxes, I just say, taxation is theft. And I want to expand on that a little bit and explain why taxation is theft.
Go for it.
I don't have any ownership claim or any legitimate ownership claim over anything that you produce. And all people have the same rights. No group has any more right than any individual member of that group has. So if me and 3 of my friends get together, we still have no legitimate claim over anything that you own or that you produce. However, when people call themselves government, they then claim to have ownership over something that you own or you produce. If I were to do that, it would be theft. If me and 3 of my friends did that, it would be theft. But somehow, by calling ourselves government, that then goes from theft to being called taxation. So taxation, any coercive taxation, is theft and should be abolished. I think that any government functions that do exist should be paid for voluntarily. For instance, I like having a fire department because they don't, go around and just premeditatedly or prematurely hose down people's houses because, there might be a fire here at some time, so we have to take precaution. They respond when there actually is an incident. So if the local government stopped paying for the fire department tomorrow, I would donate money for the fire department to continue existing. There are certain aspects of local police that I like. I don't like that they go downtown and harass college kids here in Keene because, that college kid might be 19 years old and have an open beverage container, and then we get to charge him twice, once for the open container and once for underage drinking. I don't like that aspect. But when people actually commit crimes that have victims, I do want there to be somebody there to, bring about some semblance of justice. So I would donate to certain aspects of a local police department. And that can be funded without coercive taxes. So to ask my question on taxes in a roundabout way, I think that all taxes should be abolished, and any functions that a government is to have should be funded voluntarily. Anything that can't be funded voluntarily should not be a government function.
Can you describe your stance on the abortion pro-choice issue?
This is one of those sticky issues that people love to get stuck on, of this guy's pro-life, this guy's pro-choice. And people just throw out the buzzword pro-life or pro-choice without really examining what either of those terms mean. A lot of people that claim to be pro-choice mean that they're only pro-choice on the issue of abortion. They aren't pro-choice on the issue of deciding what school that you send your children to, if you send your children to school, whether or not you are forced to pay for a military that bombs people around the world, whether or not, any of these other things, what you put in your body, whether you can drink raw milk, whether you can smoke cannabis. So people will throw out the word pro-choice and only have it apply to abortion. People will throw out the word pro-life and only have it apply to abortion. A lot of people that claim to be pro-life support war. They support the death penalty, and they support, all kinds of other things that wind up leading to people being killed at the hands of government. So I will say this. I am consistently pro-life in that I do not believe that anyone has a legitimate right to take another human's life. I apply that equally to the military, to the death penalty, to every level of government. I don't think that people should be forced to pay for other people to have abortions. So on that hand, I'm pro-life. On the other hand, I don't think that by eliminating or prohibiting a medical procedure, and that's really what abortion is. It's a medical procedure. Whether you agree that it's right or it's wrong, it should not be something that is decided by a legislative body. The best way to eliminate abortion is through education and having fully informed decisions. And a lot of people, or I shouldn't say a lot of people, but there are people, it's a smaller percentage, I think, than what some people would lead you to believe, but some people do use abortion as a form of birth control. Oh, I got pregnant accidentally because, I didn't make proper decisions beforehand to prevent this from happening, so now I'm going to go have an abortion. That certainly exists. And I think by educating people about here's all the ways that you could prevent this from happening, and then educating women before they actually, go in to have the procedure of, hey, look, there's hundreds of thousands of people that would love to adopt this baby, and try to set up some system to where people that want to adopt a baby can then partner up in some kind of way with somebody that wants to have an abortion, to where the person decides not to have an abortion and give the baby to this family that wants children but can't have, then that would be another way to eliminate abortions. And it would be done without force and without coercion, because it would be voluntary, and it would be, using an educational sort of thing. Am I making sense here?
Yes.
Okay. So
I don't know if this is a relevant question for you, considering what you've already said on military and government, but I'm going to ask it anyways. What role should our military play in the world?
If there is to be a U.S. national military, then it should only be for defensive purposes, to respond if the United States is attacked directly. And if you look at the U.S. Constitution, as again, it's a document that the federal government has in place, that's supposedly their rule book that they're supposed to follow. There's a clause that says that the military should not be funded for more than 2 years, which a plain reading of that would lead one to believe, okay, every 2 years you have to pass a spending bill for the military. But the purpose behind the writing of the wording the way they did was because the intent was there will not be a standing army in the United States. But, of course, it's turned into there is a standing army, and it's one of the largest in the world. And I think the last figure I saw showed that the U.S. spends more on a military than the next 10 countries combined. So the current role of the U.S. military is very, very broad and much broader than I think, one, the founders intended, and two, it's vastly broader than what I would like to see. I don't think that there should be military bases around the globe. The most recent count that I saw from 2012, there are bases, and this is not embassies, this is actual military bases in 157 nations around the country, or around the globe. 157. There's only 193 members of the United Nations. And then when you add in their territories, that adds up to, I think, around 268 recognized quote-unquote nations by the CIA in the CIA World Factbook. So out of 268, there's bases in 157 of them. That is 157 more nations than what the military should be in. So I say bring all the troops home, stop intervening in foreign affairs, because a lot of the problems that currently exist in the Middle East are directly because of U.S. military intervention in the Middle East. And when I use the term Middle East, I actually mean the old definition of Middle East of things on the Arabian Peninsula. You can then look further into Libya. The situation there is directly because of U.S. military intervention. The situation in Afghanistan is because of military intervention. And, of course, the CIA's intervention in the 80s by funding al-Qaeda so that they could fight the Russians, and then immediately stopping that funding after the Russians left Afghanistan. So a very short answer of what role should the military, or what role should the U.S. military play in the world? None.
How would you handle immigration and border security?
So the Constitution, again, I know I point to the document a lot, even though I don't think that it should even exist. But again, it's the rule book that the federal government has for themselves that they're supposed to abide by. That document says that there's supposed to be a uniform process for naturalization. Currently, there are hundreds of different manners of which people can immigrate to, that's immigrate with an E, can immigrate, or rather with an I, into the U.S. There's also all kind of weird rules on how people can immigrate with an E. That means leave the U.S. And the process is not uniform. There's one set of rules for people from Mexico, one set of rules for people from Canada, one set of rules for people from Cuba, and so on and so forth. Of all the rules that are in place, the one that I like the best is the rule that's in place for people from Cuba. It's called the wet foot, dry foot rule. However, there's one aspect of the rule that I don't like, and that's the fact that the Coast Guard patrols the waters between Florida and Cuba, looking for people trying to come here and sending them back to Cuba. But the rule that's in place is if the person makes it onto American soil, then they are deemed to have dry feet and they get to stay. That's the immigration policy that I think should exist with every country around the globe. If someone wants to move to the U.S., they should be able to do so. It's what my 13th great-grandfather did when Jamestown was being formed. He got on a boat, left England, came to Jamestown. He stayed. Even until the late 1800s, it was easy to immigrate to the United States. When I worked for an airline back in Birmingham, Alabama. One of the guys that I worked with was from Malawi. He had been in the U.S. for 9 years, had spent $15,000 on attorneys and paperwork fees to the federal government trying to become a U.S. citizen, and he said that he thought he still had about 2 more years of the process to go. There is absolutely no way that anybody can think that, that's a fair process, that people have to spend, a small fortune simply to be able to claim that they are a U.S. citizen. So I think that the entire immigration system needs to be overhauled. And again, I think the best policy would be to have a worldwide wet foot, dry foot rule.
How do you perceive the issues of race and discrimination in America? Do you believe we still face these challenges? What would you do as a president to move us along if you do believe there are still challenges?
Well, one only needs to look at Ferguson, and they can see that there are still challenges as far as race relations. And I hate that term because I don't see different races. I see only the human race. And there are, slight differences in skin color and ethnicity. But there definitely are still challenges as far as, an ethnic divide, if you will. And I don't really know how to fix that problem. Obviously, the, systems that are in place at the federal level are not helping the problem. If anything, they're, actually worsening the problem. There's the war on poverty that seems to really have only made, generations of people into, I hate to use the word slave, but that's basically what it has done, is made people into a government slave, to where, well, you can't really go out and try to find work because you're making more money on this government program by not doing anything. It incentivizes certain behaviors that, quite frankly, are not the best. It incentivizes single mothers to have as many children as they can, because with each new child, you get more money. So the current programs that are in place, and the reason that I mention them is I've lived in ghettos before. And a lot of the people that live in those ghettos see all white people as being the enemy. It's not the truth at all, but it's something that they're led to believe, is that all white people are, oppressing them, when in fact it's only a small group that is making laws that wind up having these effects on people that wind up being on welfare. And when you actually look at the breakdown, there are more white people on welfare than there are people of darker skin color, but somehow they get overlooked in statistics and in a lot of the sort of the stuff that is reported by the news. So the news media perpetuates that it's people with darker skin colors that are the only ones being caught in this, poverty cycle, when in fact there's a lot of white people that are caught in the poverty cycle as well. And again, I don't know exactly how to wind up fixing the ethnic issues that do exist in the U.S., but I know that the current policies don't work. So eliminating those policies that keep people in this generational cycle of poverty would do more to help the people that are poor and help the people that do feel like they're being oppressed, because they are. They're being oppressed by the government. They're not being oppressed by, like all them honkies, as I have actually heard people say. And if you have ever read the book Healing Our World by Mary Ruwart, she goes into extensive detail about some of the situations that exist in various places and how just eliminating the minimum wage laws would help people be able to find work. Because in a lot of places, and right now minimum wage is $7.25, there's the move to bump that up to $15 per hour. So, for instance, if you have a business and you're looking to hire 2 people and you currently have enough in your budget to where you could pay $10 per hour, you need 2 people to do the job. Well, you're prohibited by law from hiring 2 people at $5 per hour each, which means that you then hire 1 person, you try to make them do the job of 2 people, they can't handle it, so they quit. And so then you're left in this cycle of, always trying to find people to work for you. Well, if we would just get rid of the minimum wage laws, then more people would have employment because more people would be able to find jobs at lower amounts than what somebody thinks that they should be allowed to work for. And that would help give them a hand up. It would be able to teach people some skills that they might not have otherwise, so that it then makes them more marketable to be able to ultimately wind up making a $15 an hour wage or even more. So the current policies in place definitely do more to harm people and perpetuate the relations that we have right now. So completely get rid of all the policies that we have in place right now that keep people in that cycle of poverty that leads to the ethnic divide.
What role does the federal government play, if any, in healthcare?
Well, I think what you are asking here is what role should the federal government play? Because what role do they play? They play a very vast role, especially with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, and a lot of the policies that are to be put in place by the Affordable Care Act have still yet to be written, because a lot of the stuff in that 1,000-page document, or might have been a couple thousand-page, but the very long document called the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act has clauses that say, as directed by the Secretary, meaning the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So the Secretary of Health and Human Services still has a lot of regulation to write for the Affordable Care Act. But if the question is what role should the federal government play in healthcare, I would say none. I don't believe that there should be any regulations on healthcare. And that's not to say that I think your local doctor should be allowed to give you rat poison and call it aspirin, because that would be fraud. So when I say that there should not be any regulations on healthcare, that means that things such as being a midwife should not be regulated to the point of extinction. I've got a friend that's a midwife that several years ago, she attended a birth. She was at the time 6 days from getting her midwife license. The midwife that she was studying under had another birth that she had to go to, and she made the decision, okay, you stay here, and most likely the other birth is going to happen first. I'll be able to come back, but you stay here just in case anything happens. Something happened. She performed a maneuver. The baby's shoulder got caught on the pelvis. She performed a maneuver. The baby came out. There was no problem with that. What happened after was she took a blood pressure of the baby and the mother. There was an acupuncturist that was there as well at the request of the mother. In California, acupuncturists are licensed medical professionals. My friend was 6 days from getting her midwife license. She performed a medical procedure without a license, that being taking a blood pressure. She was then convicted of a felony practicing medicine without a license because she took a blood pressure. Well, she just found out yesterday that a judge has many years later reduced that from a felony down to a misdemeanor. But that has not, in any way undone the years of her life that have basically been destroyed, where she had to sell her house to pay bills to try to feed herself and her two children because she could not get a job because she had that letter F next to her name. So when I say undo regulations on medicine, that's what I'm talking about, is allowing people that know what they're doing. They're 6 days away from getting this special piece of paper that would allow them to take a blood pressure. Undo that regulation. Let people be able to do what they know how to do. Let people be able to practice what they know how to practice. In a lot of states, chiropractors are, heavily regulated, so bad that it's virtually impossible in some of the more rural areas to find a chiropractor. And that's something that definitely needs to be reconciled, and you can do that by getting rid of all of the heavy regulations that push everybody that's not a quote-unquote traditional medicine practitioner to the side.
What priority would you give repair of infrastructure? What should be the role of the federal government in maintaining infrastructure?
By infrastructure, I guess you're meaning roads, highways, bridges.
Correct.
There should not be a federal role in infrastructure at all. There was a bill when James Madison was president. There was a bill to build canals and roads. James Madison vetoed the bill, saying that Congress lacked the authorization in the Constitution to do such. And James Madison should know, because he's the guy that wrote the document that is the rule book that the federal government is supposed to abide by. So there should not be, based on their rule book. Now, based on my principles of what I think that any government should, have the authority to do, if a group of people want to get together and collectively, say, we are going to pave this section of road, they should be allowed to do that voluntarily. And there's a lot of examples of private roads in the United States right now. So when I mention private roads, a lot of people, well, can you give me an example? Yes. Nearly every homeowners association in the United States has roads going through them. Those roads are not maintained by any city or county or state or federal government. Those roads are maintained by the homeowners association. When you drive into a shopping mall or an amusement park, there's roads. Those roads are maintained by the property owner. So it's not unheard of that people can, do this thing called maintain a road without a government. People build roads without governments. There's actually a historic monument in New Hampshire that's talking about the first turnpike in New Hampshire, and it was privately built and maintained for many years before the state government bought it using eminent domain from the person that built and maintained this road. So the federal government should not have anything to do with roads, with bridges. I don't even think that the federal government should have anything to do with air travel, train travel, bus travel, etc. But, that's probably a different discussion.
Where do you stand on the issue of personal privacy and the need to protect ourselves from quote-unquote terrorists and terrorism?
Well, I tend to think that I can find a terrorist that is within, my own viewing distance. I don't need the federal government to stand over my shoulder looking for terrorists. I also don't think that the federal government or any government or government agency, for that matter, should be allowed to read my emails, see what I search for online. And one reason that I believe that, aside from I have the right to privacy, is that I am a writer. And if you look back through some of the documents that were leaked by Edward Snowden and other things that have been revealed by the Associated Press, you can see that the federal government has overstepped its bounds. And actually, at one time, I believe it was in 2012, where the federal government subpoenaed records from the phone provider for the Associated Press to get all phone records during a 3-month period. And what that was about is one of the people writing for the Associated Press was doing a story about terrorism and had actually contacted someone that was a suspected terrorist. The federal government, all they saw was, somebody contacted this person that we think may possibly maybe be a terrorist at some point in the future. We need to find out who that was and what all of their contacts were about. So the Associated Press got caught up in this dragnet, and all of their phone records for a 3-month period were subpoenaed by the federal government. There's an organization that I donate money to on a regular basis called antiwar.com. The FBI has been investigating them for several years because the FBI believes that there may possibly be some foreign influence over the reporting that happens there at antiwar.com. Now, I don't think that either of these instances, the Associated Press or antiwar.com, being investigated has anything to do with terrorism, but that's the claim that they make. Is, there might be foreign influence, so therefore it might have a connection to terrorism in the case of antiwar.com. And in the case of the Associated Press, they were contacting this person, so therefore we think that one of the people there may possibly maybe be a terrorist at some point in the future, maybe. So it's one of those things of, if you allow the government to start snooping into trying to find terrorists, then everything is going to become terrorism. And we're all eventually going to wind up being inmates in the world's largest prison. Although it might be an open air prison, we're still going to be inmates in the world's largest prison. So I don't think that the federal government or any government agency has a legitimate right to snoop on people under the guise of, we have to find terrorists. And something else that was revealed by Edward Snowden was these vast warrants that were given out by the FISA court. Instead of being a specific warrant for a specific person for a specific reason, there are these vast warrants of, we want to be able to spy on anybody that has done X. And that just opens it up to where you have to spy on everybody to figure out if anybody has done X. So the entire spying system set up by the NSA and by the federal government, and who knows what the CIA is doing, all of that should be shut down immediately.
The next question isn't a litmus test, and it can kind of seem like a touchy thing, but it is important to a lot of voters. What role does faith, religion, spirituality, etc. play in your life, and what type of role would it play for you as president?
So, yeah, you're right. This is kind of a touchy subject because a lot of people, they'll hear, a certain politician say, I have, X faith. And that influences the way they wind up, handling their elected office, not so much in the moral and ethical decisions that they make, but rather in the legislative decisions that they make. So I'll answer the question of what role does faith play in my life by saying that I do have some spiritual beliefs, and it really doesn't matter what they are as long as I don't enforce them with the threat of force on anyone else. I've written a book called The Anarcho-Teachings of Yeshua, so you can probably take from the title of that book what my spiritual beliefs are. But at the same time, I do believe in the Golden Rule and the Greatest Commandment. The Golden Rule being do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which means I don't want to steal from you. I don't want to harm you in any way. I don't want to murder you. I don't want to, fill in the blank. I don't want to cause you unjust harm. So therefore, I don't think that you should cause me any unjust harm. That's how I live my life. The greatest commandment is love one another as God has loved you. And that falls right in line with the Golden Rule, and I believe is completely consistent with the non-aggression principle of you have a right to defend your life, but you don't have a right to initiate force against any person for any reason.
You get the chance to be a political forecaster now. Predict two major problems facing our country in the future that no one is talking about, or maybe people aren't talking about too much. And what would you do to prepare America for it?
Ooh, this is a very difficult question. I know you had sent me the questions beforehand, and I actually didn't read every single word of this one. I just saw predict two major problems, and I'm thinking Republicans and Democrats. But people are talking about them, just not in the extent that I think that people should be talking about them. But to add on to this, things that no one is talking about, or can I use the bar of things that people aren't talking about enough?
Yeah, the spirit of the question is something you see coming down the road that isn't being talked about much. That's kind of the spirit of the question.
I would say, and I don't see this as a problem, but I would say secession is definitely something that is coming down the road that people aren't talking about enough. Certainly, it's kind of in the national spotlight a little bit because of the situation in Scotland, where they had their vote just a few days ago, and of course it wound up failing. But secession is something that I do see as becoming a major topic in the U.S. in the next several years. There was the proposal out in California, and unfortunately, it appears as though they did not have enough signatures to get the petition on the ballot in 2016 that would have split California into 6 different states. There's a move in Northern California that's completely separate from the Six Californias initiative that would split off the northern part of California and southern Oregon into the state of Jefferson. There's some level of movement in Colorado to create a new state of North Colorado. And even in Vermont, which is the state right next door to where I live, they have a very strong secessionist movement. There's a growing secessionist movement in New Hampshire. So I do think that within, I'll say, the next 5 to 10 years, secession will be something that is talked about a lot more than it currently is. And I think that it will be talked about in a way that is absent from national politics. And what I mean by that is, I'm sure you remember after the 2012 election, there were the petitions that went up on the petition.whitehouse.gov website saying, Texas should be able to secede, and Oklahoma, and there was one for all of the 50 states. But that seemed to be very much driven by politics of the day, of, I don't like Obama, I want to leave. And then there was some rumblings after George Bush got elected and then reelected about certain areas wanting to secede. But the areas that were wanting to leave when George Bush was in office are now the ones that are more likely to say, no, we should stick it out because their preferred guy is in office. But I do see that at some point in, again, the next 5 to 10 years, the topic of secession will be completely separate from national politics. That regardless of whether it's red team fascist or blue team fascist that is in the White House and controlling Congress, there will be moves for secession within the United States. Something else that I think, and there are some people that talk about this, but again, it's not being talked about enough, and that's the economy. And when I say economy, I'm talking specifically about the Federal Reserve printing money, to where they've been doing this quantitative easing thing that all it is really doing is driving up the amount of money in circulation, thereby decreasing the value of the dollar. I heard something a couple days ago that the Chinese yuan might wind up being the world reserve currency within the next 5 years. So the dollar and the value of the dollar is something that people are really going to have to wind up paying attention to sometime soon. And I know libertarians have been saying this for 40 years. The whole reason the Libertarian Party was formed in 1971 was because Richard Nixon took the U.S. officially off the gold standard, even though, for the most part, the gold standard had been removed in the 1930s. He took the international gold standard away, to where prior to 1971, if China or Canada or some other country that owned some of the U.S. debt, they could then go to the federal government and say, we want gold for this, and then gold would have to be given away for the appropriate amount of dollars. In 1971, that was taken away. That's why the Libertarian Party was founded. And since 1971, the Libertarian Party has been saying, the dollar's going to collapse soon. And so far, it hasn't completely collapsed. But if the quantitative easing continues and the U.S. dollar then loses world reserve status, then I think, people are really going to have to start paying attention to what is really going on behind the dollar. And that's why I encourage people to use alternatives to the U.S. dollar, whether that be gold, silver, cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Litecoin, NXT. I think that people really should learn how to barter and use things other than the U.S. dollar, because it's something that at some point in the future is definitely going to be needed.
Okay. We all have strengths and weaknesses, skills and abilities that are, unique to us. Can you give us some of your weaknesses, not necessarily character flaws and all that, but just areas that you are not as strong in and that you would need help with if you were president?
Yeah, so weaknesses, aside from having arthritis in both knees and at some point, going to need a cane to do stairs, I would say that I have a bad short-term memory, and that's from a lot of concussions. And I've also had this permanent headache for a little over 3 years that I would love to be able to treat with therapeutic cannabis, but unfortunately that's illegal in New Hampshire, and I can't find what I need. There's a lot of people, and let me just sort of go off on a tangent here. A lot of people have this misconception about, people that want to use therapeutic cannabis, they just want to smoke and get high. I can't smoke cannabis. It does not work well with the headache that I've had. I need a specific type of tincture that is almost impossible to find because of the drug war. So if there's one main weakness, I would say it's this horrible headache that I've been dealing with, and the fact that I can't get the medicine that I need because, one, nobody wants to make it because it's not as profitable, and it takes a lot longer to make a tincture than to just, sell people some stuff that they can smoke. So hopefully within the next couple of years, I will be able to get the relief that I want in the manner that I want it without the risk of going to jail just for possessing something that helps me with a headache. So that being said, I also have this bad short-term memory that some days is a lot worse than others. So I would definitely need, some kind of presidential aid to make sure that I don't forget short-term detailed stuff. So I would say that that's definitely the biggest weakness that I have is the short-term memory.
And are there any other issues you would like to discuss that haven't been covered?
Well, I touched briefly on secession, and I would just like to encourage people to look into secession in a way that doesn't scare you. Because a lot of people, they think, well, the issue of secession was handled in the U.S. There was a war and nearly 1 million people died. Well, no, that doesn't settle the issue. That settled one specific issue at one specific time in a very violent way. It did not answer the question of whether or not people have a right to self-determination. It just, at the time in the 1860s, answered the question of whether or not the military of the Confederate States of America was stronger than the military of the United States of America. It did not settle the question of secession. Something else is the concept of nullification that in a lot of conversations goes hand in hand with secession, because a lot of people, they only think, well, nullification, that's stuff that was used in the South because, slavery. Well, at the time slavery existed, slavery was perfectly legal. Now, the state of Wisconsin in the 1850s actually nullified the Federal Fugitive Slave Act that said that if a fugitive slave came into your area, then you were required by law to capture that person and return that person to the person claiming ownership of that fugitive slave. The legislature in Wisconsin passed a law saying no one in Wisconsin is required to abide by the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. There was a lawsuit that went to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. The Wisconsin Supreme Court upheld the law by the Wisconsin legislature. So that's just one example of the many in which nullification was used in a manner that had nothing to do directly with one person claiming ownership of another. And when I say directly, even though that was related to slavery, they were saying that you cannot be punished for not abiding by this federal rule. And that's really what nullification is a state legislature saying that this law that was passed by the federal government violates the federal government's rules that they're to abide by. There were tariffs that were nullified by governments of states in New England. I forget the specifics, but in the 1830s, or it might have been 1820s, there was actually a threat by the New England states to secede from the United States over some tariffs and import fees. And then ultimately it was another tariff that wound up causing the states in the South to secede. But I would just like to encourage people to read more about nullification and secession from a pure objective standard instead of the subjective, well, these things were only used because people were bad and wanted to own other people. And that's not what either of those things are really about.
All right. We're at the end of the interview now. This is the time for closing remarks in 2, 3 minutes, 1 minute, whatever. Can you tell us why we should vote for you? And just give us any closing remarks you'd like to make.
Well, in 2016, if you want to actually be able to say that you voted for an actual libertarian for president, then you should vote for me. And, again, don't be under any disillusion that somehow your vote actually matters, because we know that federal elections are not decided by single votes. In 2000, we all remember the 2000 presidential election when the state of Florida was decided by 537 votes, and a lot of people blamed Pat Buchanan for somehow throwing the election to George Bush in Florida. And it was based on this weird thing of people not understanding that butterfly ballot that they had. But there were actually 7 candidates not named Pat Buchanan that had over the margin of vote between George Bush and Al Gore in the state of Florida. So if you vote, and I understand that there are some people that don't, and I'm not going to try to convince you to do so, but if you do vote and you don't buy into the wasted vote theory, that if you actually look through history, you can find out that it's just that. It's a theory. It's not a fact. Some people like to say, if you don't vote for the guy that came in first or second, you wasted your vote. Well, I've asked people that support this, well, since you voted for the guy that came in second, didn't you actually waste your vote too, since you didn't vote for the guy that won? So I don't buy into the wasted vote theory. I'm trying to convince more people that it actually is BS. So if you actually want to be able to be proud of the vote that you make in 2016, then I would encourage you to help me, one, get on the ballot, and two, vote for me. Not because I actually think that I'm going to win, but because by being a presidential candidate, I will be able to spread the ideas of liberty and spread an actual libertarian message that more people will hear, because people actually do pay attention to elections. People listened to Ross Perot mainly because he had a bunch of money to wind up buying ads and infomercials, but people listened to him because he was running for president. If he was just some old crazy guy with pie charts buying ads on television, nobody would have watched because he wasn't doing anything that they deemed to be important. But because he was running for president, people paid attention to him. When Ron Paul in 2008 was running for president, people paid attention to what he was saying because he was running for political office. And then there have been some minor party debates that have been put on over the years by the Free and Equal Foundation, and people pay attention to those because they want to hear ideas other than the Republican and Democrat ideas of, I'm not a Republican and I'm not a Democrat. But that's really all the Republicans and Democrats stand for, is they're not the other thing. Where I actually have ideas and principles that I do stand for. So, again, I would encourage you to help me get on the ballot. Of course, I will be seeking the Libertarian Party's nomination, but most likely the LP is going to nominate a non-libertarian as their candidate, as they have so often done, because they get distracted by, shiny thing that used to be a Republican. He can bring us votes, but they lose sight of the actual principles. So please head over to DarrylWPerry.com and find out more about me and my campaign, and I'll be putting something up soon about how people can actually help me obtain ballot access in these 50 different states.
Thank you, Mr. Perry, for participating in this interview. I'd like to thank my listeners again for listening to 2016 presidential candidate interviews. Be sure to check back in the future for more candidate interviews. Have a good day, and remember to keep informed, passionate, and most of all, keep involved. Thank you, Mr. Perry.
Thank you.